It's Saturday evening. It's time to talk about the very best comic books of the week. Drew is on assignment. He's in St. Louis fulfilling his Unholy Nightmare campaign. So filling in, we do have Gabe Hernandez. How you doing, Gabe?
Thank you for having me, Wes. I'm so happy to be back on the show at a different capacity instead of doing the live stream on Saturdays. So I'm happy to talk about the books of the week and maybe not as long as talk as it normally is, because it was not a really strong week for a lot of comics, especially at the big two. But we're going to talk about it. There are some gems in there, and hopefully we're going to have a good time.
It's a weird week because it looks like Image decided, well, if DC All-In Special is coming out that week, we're going to take the week off. There's a couple of books out there, but I think they only produced 6 comic books this week. Marvel decided to take the week off as well. You get the Storm #1 and a new Star Wars book. But other than that, none of their major titles whatsoever. It feels like everyone just said, screw it, DC gets this week for not only DC All-In Special, but also DC Absolute Power #4, the finale of the big event that I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to. Me personally, I didn't read it, but I know that you were paying attention to Absolute Power. We got the finale here, a new status quo. People's powers have changed and rearranged, and some people are not powered and some people are now powered. Some characters are dead. In the end, was the juice worth the squeeze with Absolute Power?
The answer to that question from my point of view is absolutely 100% no. If you look at where Absolute Power started, and if you look at where it finished, with a few tweaks and exceptions, almost nothing changed. It was basically take all the toys out of the toy box, mess them up a bit, and then put them right back when you're done. Yeah, a few characters had their powers swapped, like Plastic Man doesn't stretch now, he's intangible. Black Canary doesn't have a canary cry, she has, I think, heat vision or something to that degree. Few little ins and outs there, and I think maybe even Barry Allen lost his speed, something not quite right there. But other than that, it was sort of like a whole lot of nothing. All those tie-ins, all of the Absolute Power Task Force 7 parallel mini-series that built up all these amazos that try to explain where everybody in the universe was doing whatever they were doing and how they were stopped. But by the time you got to the end of it, none of it mattered. And I think that's kind of the biggest letdown of this issue. Is it was supposed to be the big event of the year that led into the biggest, most important comic of the year, which we'll talk about, which is All-In Special #1, or maybe we won't talk about it, but it was talked about on the stream earlier today, which also then leads into the Absolute Imprint, which is the new versions of Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, and everything that goes along with it. And it just sort of fell kind of flat, to be honest with you. I think Mark Waid has just been consistently good since he was allowed back at DC, and I think that has something to do with Bill Jemis's exit, maybe not. But since he's been back, he's really been hitting pretty well across the board with Shazam, World's Finest, and all the comics that he's been involved with in between, wherever he can get himself inserted. This was his big architected showing of, let me show you how to do a big event. And it's better than anything Williamson architected, that's for sure. But as far as something that I would say, oh yeah, I'm really going to remember this, and this made a big impact, and I'm glad I was there for this when they came out, I really don't feel that way. I think it was just kind of a dud.
We shall see what happens with DC moving forward. Obviously, they got a lot of exciting things happening, but we do need to talk about the very best comic books in the week. We've got 4 indies. We got one big 2 book. First up, Hyde Street #1, Jeff Johns, Ivan Reis. Writing and illustrating this. This is the 4th book in the Ghost Machine imprint at Image Comics. And once again, we've got another winner here. This is the horror anthology book. We get introduced to Pranky and Mr. X-Ray, I believe.
Yep.
We get a little bit of backstory on Mr. X-Ray and kind of a good idea of what it is that they're actually doing on Hyde Street, that there's another ominous force behind there. And definitely the standout element of the book itself is Ivan Reis. He absolutely nails it. And definitely another recommend and another winner from Ghost Machine.
The book, I liked it. I like horror. I'm a horror fan. The supernatural tone is right up my alley. The art is fantastic. I think the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of pause is it's not a really super strong hook in the first issue, but Jeff Johns has a way of getting those stories to kind of grow on you, to kind of pull you along. So I'm very curious about how it turns out, but I think it was a very strong showing for a first start, and the art is fantastic. So if you're really into comics for the great art, you're not going to go wrong with this issue.
I personally like Frankie a lot. I thought he was a really cool character. They had some really interesting stuff with him, and he comes off as quite terrifying for such a young child.
Yeah, imagine a demonic version of Damian Wayne. So he's kind of like a smart aleck. He definitely wants to, he enjoys his work a little too much, I think is the way I put it in the review. So imagine a little kid that has the ability to send you to hell or to damn you to a gruesome death and those kinds of things. So there's some gleeful fun from a horror point of view in there. And there is some gore. So if you're not into horror, especially horror that has some gore in it, you might want to set your expectations. But if you don't mind a little blood, a little gruesomeness, and definitely that demonic spirit, you're going to have fun with this one.
Absolutely. I guess the first like Ghost Machine special is coming out that'll be related to this. I think it's called Devour. It seems like it's going to be focusing on like a fitness type of resident on Hyde Street that takes souls. So that'll be fun. Be on the lookout for that one. Also from Ghost Machine, we're definitely recommending Redcoat #6, Jeff Johns writing, Brian Hitch on art. This is the conclusion of the first story arc from Redcoat itself. We got Simon Pure in the dire straits as he's realized he's been bamboozled by Benedict Arnold himself. He's about to not be immortal anymore. He has already pushed away Albert Einstein, and things are going from bad to worse. It's wonderfully illustrated, really great imagining of the character. It almost feels like it's the end of the Redcoat series, but I imagine it is going to go on because it does feel like they introduced the next villain.
Yeah, it does look like they introduced the next villain, and I believe at the end of the issue, they say there's one more issue after this one that's supposed to be some kind of epilogue story, presumably with the new villain. Pretty similar to, say, Geiger and Rook Exodus. This story grew on me. I was not sold on the first issue. I thought it was okay, but it was hard to get into because Simon Pure is not a good guy. Or at least when we first meet him, he's kind of a jerk. He's lazy, he's a bum, and all these things. But that series really grows on you because he's kind of forced in that position. And by the time the arc finishes much stronger than it started. And so if you picked up the first issue or two and you thought, okay, keep going with it. Because by the time you get to the finality, it's a big bang of a finale. A lot of things happen, action, there's some heart, and it really kind of gets you invested in that character. Plus that last page twist reveal of a new character who might be a villain could be a really big deal. So I would highly recommend Redcoat, even though I wasn't sold on it from the beginning. By the time it ended, it really picked up steam, and I was very happy with how it finished.
I couldn't agree with you more. The very first issue, I was like, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't know that I like the series. And as it's gone on, I've definitely invested more and more and more. And not only just because Simon Pure, but I think the Albert Einstein character really grows on you as well. So that one's been a whole lot of fun. Really just enjoying everything at Ghost Machine these days. Also recommending Nemesis Rogues Gallery #3, Mark Miller writing, Valerio Giordano on art. The dastardly version of the dynamic duo here. You've got evil Batman now has his evil Robin. And there's a lot of really good twisted turns on this one. None better than the one at the very end, where a few people think that they're getting the drop because they don't realize this is Nemesis and his actual Robin. And it turns out they just screwed themselves over and accidentally got themselves into a room that they didn't want to. And the art by Valerio Giordano continues to be really haunting, especially the eyes of Nemesis himself. He looks so crazed every time you see him.
Yeah, the art really gets into the eyes of the character, and he's like, why are you focusing so much on the eyes? Because when he looks at you, that is not somebody you want looking at you that way. He's just straight up crazy, and he's an unapologetic villain. And that's what's so kind of refreshing and different about the series compared to everything else is Nemesis is a villain. He's straight up a villain. He's not a unredeemable, or I should say an misunderstood kind of person. He truly is evil to his core. And now he's got a sidekick by the name of Pedro, where they're in it together and they're just having so much fun being evil. There are some over the top scenes in it that I think logistically don't quite make sense, but they're having so much fun doing it. They're having such a blast being evil, killing people, stealing things, overturning government agencies, stealing corporations, just all kinds of weird, wacky stuff that is so over the top, it's almost ridiculous, but they're having so much fun doing it. You don't mind some of the logistical plot holes and that tend to pop up. I mean, of all the Mark Miller world, I should say Mill World comics, everything that's coming out from Mark Miller, I think this one to me is probably the most fun, just because it's so unapologetically evil and mischievous and wants to just make you appreciate somebody doing the most horrific things but have a good time doing it, which is very strange, but I like it.
And all these other imprints really hitting right now on the indie scene, thank goodness, because the big two aren't really doing that. The final comic book that we definitely will recommend that has been hitting on all cylinders for well over a year, Conan Battle the Blackstone #2, Jim Zub writing, Jonas Scharf on art. This is the big crossover with a bunch of the Robert E. Howard kind of characters and a few new ones that are actually thrown in here that Jim Zub himself has created. Really enjoying Battle of the Blackstone, and we've got these different characters through different times. We're in the Hyborian Age, and we're in the mid 1930s, and all these different ages throughout time, all brought together by this single sigil. No one knows exactly what this symbol means. It turns out it's a word. It means hunted. I really, really like this one. If it wasn't for the next book that we're going to talk about, it easily would have been my pick of the week. This was a really, really strong comic book, and Jonas Scharf is nailing it.
Love it, love it, love it. I am, in addition to being a horror fan, I'm also a pulp character fan, going back to like the earliest 20th century, those type of writers, Robert E. Howard, Edgar Rice Burroughs. That's my Jimmy Jam. So this crossover could not make me happier. You've got everybody from Black Agnes to Solomon Kane to Conrad and Kieran and all these characters that are coming from all these different Robert E. Howard stories, and you're finding a fantastic way to bring them together in one place at one time to fight an evil that is greater than Conan can handle on its own. This is the quintessential team up of team ups from a pulp character lovers catalog of stories and characters. Just the art is fantastic. Jonas Scharf's art is fantastic. The way Zub brings all these characters together, the mechanism by which he does it, and the way he plays with visions and events that are somehow echoing through time and space at the same time just looks fantastic. And I can't wait for this, how this series is going to play out, because he's coming up with one surprise after the next, things that you don't expect. He's also now peppering in bits of Lovecraftian kind of horror and monsters, which just kind of takes it up another notch in my book. So yeah, easily this could have been a #1 book, depending on, your preferences and tastes. For me, I think it is a #1 book. So it depends on the type of stories you like. I just love this. I love this miniseries. I love what Jim Zub is doing with Conan as a whole. And I love how Titan is given this character the room and the attention it deserves from people who love this character, meaning Conan, and the results are showing for themselves. Fantastic miniseries overall.
And they've absolutely been knocking it out the park with Titan Comics on the Conan brand. I'm actually going to do a Conan the Barbarian spotlight, within the next week, talking about why everybody should have been reading this for the past year. But if you haven't got on the bandwagon, I'm going to talk you into it, because this thing has been absolutely amazing, obviously culminating with this fantastic crossover. Going over the big two, we've only got one book represented, nothing from DC, but we do have from Marvel Comics. Wolverine Deep Cut #4, Chris Claremont writing, Edgar Salazar on art. This is my pick of the week. I just couldn't believe how well Chris Claremont was able to nail this and really fit it perfectly in between a couple of issues about 30 years ago. We've had Wolverine fighting the Marauders. There's been a little bit of Sabretooth, certainly lots of hints of Mr. Sinister. And my goodness, Mr. Sinister finally shows up, and I didn't recognize the character anymore. I am so used to mincing, prancing Mr. Sinister from Kieran Gillen that has destroyed the character over the past 10 to 15 years. This is the real Mr. Sinister, the character that Chris Claremont created. He's badass, he's bold, he's very strong, and he is a force to be reckoned with on his own. And there's some amazing fight scenes. Edgar Salazar, every single issue is upping his game. It started out with Wolverine Madripoor Nights. It got better and better and better. And in Deep Cut, it got better and better and even better and better. And by the end of this, I was so excited about it. It sucks that it's only a miniseries. It sucks that it's contained in continuity from 30 years ago, because we should be getting stories this good in continuity now. We are not. So I'm glad it came out, and I was over the moon at just how well this ended up turning out in the end. Couldn't believe it.
Bringing some of the classic writers back from Marvel sometimes has been hit or miss, especially in recent miniseries. But Chris Claremont absolutely nailed this. If you like the 100% OG Wolverine versus Sabretooth rivalry, and then throw in the OG Marauders with the OG Mr. Sinister, he brings it all together. It feels like the classic comic. It looks and acts like the classic comic. It doesn't shy away from getting bloody. It doesn't shy away from the action and the violence, and just bring it all together with a finale that it just captures that spirit from that era of the X-Men and brings it all home in a satisfying conclusion. So it doesn't feel like updated or modern. And you're right, to your point, Mr. Sinister does show up, and it is the classic Mr. Sinister. He's not foppish or fancy or prim or anything like this. Is OG Mr. Sinister. He's all about the clones. He's all about the experimentation. He's all about wearing that classic costume with the weird cape, and just love it from start to finish. This was probably one of the best legacy writer return miniseries that we've had in quite a while. And so if you like that classic Wolverine Sabretooth rivalry with some Mr. Sinister thrown in, you're going to love this comic.
Absolutely. You should definitely be on the bandwagon for that. And then once you read that, go back to Madripoor Nights. It's another one with the exact same creative team. They did really well on that one. Not quite as good as Deep Cut, but I really enjoyed that as well. And if you're DC Comics, I got nothing for you. You should hang your head in shame. You had Absolute Power #4. You had All In Special #1. You had an issue of Batman. And there's nothing that we in good conscience can recommend as something that people need to go out there and read, Gabe. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, if you are a DC fan, this was supposed to be your week. And I'm sorry, this is not the week for DC. I was struggling to find something to add to the list that we could talk about, so we can give your listeners and your watchers more meat to chew on. But yeah, for DC, I got nothing. If anything, I was ready to start adding to the list with some maybe B-tier books on the indie side, like maybe Spawn 357, which was actually pretty good. I wouldn't call it top tier, but it was pretty good. And that title's been consistently good since they had the big 350 milestone issue. But for DC, I'm sorry, buddy, I got nothing for you. This is just not a good week it's not a good month for DC. So maybe Absolute Batman will turn it around next week. We'll see. I've already seen it, already read it. Reviews in process. I won't spoil what I feel about it, but I will say, well, you know what? Just wait for next week and we'll find out how it goes.
Well, I could definitely spoil it. You will hear me talk about Absolute Batman #1 next week. It'll be on the recommend list. It's a good book. I definitely recommend people go check it out. There is a non-spoiler review out there. If you want to feel for what the book is, not for all the details on what happens, definitely go check that out. It's up on the channel. Definitely want to say thank you very much to Gabe for standing in for Drew this week. Really appreciate it. And if you enjoy conversations like this and this kind of content, and you want more, go over to Think Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. Jim from Weird Science, the big review site that's out there, the most honest brokers in all of comic books. We talk about all the major publishers, Marvel, DC, indie publishers, all the big books that come out that week. It's called the Hot or Not Podcast. On the Doc is right here, and you also get the Q&A special. You get Doc Unfiltered. You get lots of extra bonus material, including extra videos and stuff like that. Hope to see you there very soon.